I used to believe that the loudest person in a neighborhood always had the most power. I was wrong. Sometimes the quietest house on the street is the one you should never underestimate. The delivery van rolled to a gentle stop in front of my gate just after 3 on a warm Tuesday afternoon. Sunlight reflected from freshly washed windows across Maple Ridge, one of those neighborhoods where trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and spotless sidewalks gave visitors the impression that nothing unexpected ever happened there. The driver stepped out, glanced at the address on a medium-sized package, and smiled politely before lifting it from the cargo area. It should have taken less than 2 minutes. I opened my front door before he reached the porch. "Afternoon," he said. "Package for Ethan Walker." "That's me." He handed me the box, scanned the barcode, and thanked me for being home. It was an ordinary exchange, the kind that happens thousands of times every day across America without anyone paying attention. Then I heard heels striking concrete. Sharp, fast, deliberate. "Excuse me." A woman's voice cut through the quiet street. The delivery driver turned first. I followed a heartbeat later. Karen Brooks marched across the sidewalk with the confidence of someone who expected everyone else to move out of her way. Her neatly pressed clothes, perfectly styled hair, and rigid posture made her look less like a neighbor and more like someone arriving to inspect a crime scene. In one hand, she carried her phone, already recording. In the other, she pointed directly toward the van parked beside my gate. "You can't park there," she declared before either of us could respond. The driver remained calm. "I'm just completing a delivery, ma'am. You are blocking the neighborhood entrance." He looked over his shoulder. The street behind him was completely open. Cars could pass freely in both directions. "I'm only here for a moment." Karen didn't seem interested in his answer. Instead, she slowly circled the van, filming every angle as though documenting evidence for a courtroom. A pair of neighbors watering flowers paused to watch. Another resident walking a dog slowed to listen. Within seconds, an audience had formed without anyone saying a word. I felt the familiar pressure that comes whenever one person decides to turn an ordinary afternoon into public theater. "There are HOA rules," Karen announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "People like you think they can ignore them." The driver politely nodded. "I'll be leaving now." But Karen stepped slightly closer, never touching him, never raising her voice beyond what could still sound controlled, yet making it impossible to mistake her intention. "Oh no," she replied. "Not before I document this." She aimed her camera toward my house. "And the homeowner is encouraging it." That caught me off guard. I didn't ask him where to park. I answered evenly. "He's delivering one package." "It doesn't matter." She tapped rapidly across her phone. "I'm filing a complaint with the HOA immediately." The driver glanced toward me with an apologetic expression. I simply shrugged, trying to reassure him that none of this was his fault. He climbed back into the van and drove away less than 90 seconds after arriving. Karen kept recording until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Then she lowered her phone, looked directly at me, and offered a thin smile that carried no warmth at all. "You should expect a letter," she said. "Some homeowners need reminders that rules exist." Without waiting for my response, she turned and walked back across the street, convinced she had just defended the neighborhood. I looked down at the package still resting in my hands. It contained nothing more dramatic than replacement parts for my coffee machine. Yet somehow, before I had even opened the box, I had the unmistakable feeling that the real delivery arriving at my house that afternoon wasn't inside the cardboard package. It was trouble, and neither Karen nor I realized that those 90 seconds at my front gate were about to change far more than either of us could imagine. By the next morning, the package sitting on my kitchen counter had become the least interesting thing delivered to my house. What arrived instead was judgment. I woke before sunrise, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and opened my laptop to answer emails before heading to work. Outside, Maple Ridge looked exactly as it always did. Sprinklers whispered across neatly trimmed lawns. Early joggers waved politely as they passed. A golden retriever pulled its owner toward the neighborhood trail. Nothing suggested that yesterday's strange encounter had already begun spreading beyond my front gate. Then my phone vibrated. A notification from the community Facebook group. Normally I ignored it. Most posts were about lost pets, garage sales, or reminders to bring trash bins inside before evening. This time, however, the preview stopped me cold. Another homeowner ignoring community parking rules. The attached image was unmistakable. My house. My driveway. The delivery van parked beside my gate. Karen had uploaded several photos along with a carefully written paragraph describing how certain residents believed neighborhood rules did not apply to them. She never mentioned my name directly, but she didn't have to. My house number appeared clearly in one of the pictures. The comments multiplied faster than I expected. Rules exist for everyone. HOA needs to enforce this. This neighborhood is changing. A few people questioned whether a delivery vehicle stopping briefly was actually a violation, but those comments quickly disappeared beneath newer replies supporting Karen's position. I closed the app. Arguing online had never solved anything. Less than an hour later, another notification appeared. This time it came from the official HOA portal. Compliance notice pending review. I opened the message. It informed me that a complaint had been submitted regarding an unauthorized vehicle obstructing a residential access point. The language sounded formal, almost legal, despite describing something that had lasted less than 2 minutes. At the bottom was a sentence that lingered in my mind. Additional penalties may apply if repeated violations are observed. Repeated violations? There had only been one delivery. I leaned back in my chair and replayed the previous afternoon in my head. The driver had arrived. He handed me the package. He left. No blocked traffic. No angry drivers. No emergency vehicles. No confrontation until Karen created one. The timeline was almost absurd in its simplicity. Before I could think any further, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Hi. This is Michael from Swift Ship Delivery. His voice carried an uncomfortable hesitation. I'm the driver who delivered your package yesterday. I remember. I wanted to let you know someone filed a complaint with our dispatch center too. That surprised me. They did. Apparently, I violated neighborhood parking restrictions. He paused before adding quietly. My vehicle GPS shows I was stopped for exactly 91 seconds. 91 seconds. Not 5 minutes. Not 10. 1 minute and 31 seconds. I figured you should know, he continued. Dispatch reviewed the route and told me I followed company procedure. After thanking him, I ended the call and stared through the kitchen window toward my front gate. Something about this no longer felt like an overprotective neighbor complaining about parking. Karen had contacted the HOA. She had publicly posted photographs. Now she had reported the driver to his employer. 3 separate complaints over 91 seconds. That wasn't frustration. It was a pattern. Across the street, Karen stepped outside carrying a mug of coffee. She noticed me looking through the window and smiled with quiet satisfaction before turning away as though nothing unusual had happened. For the first time since moving into Maple Ridge, I stopped seeing this as an isolated disagreement between neighbors. Someone had invested a remarkable amount of effort into creating a problem where none existed. And somewhere beneath the polished language of HOA notices and carefully edited social media posts, I had the unmistakable feeling that the real story hadn't even begun. The first crack in a carefully built story is rarely dramatic. Sometimes it is nothing more than a timestamp. The compliance letter arrived by certified mail the following afternoon. The envelope looked official enough to make most homeowners nervous before they even opened it. A bold HOA logo occupied the upper left corner, while the words "Notice of Violation" were printed across the front end. Heavy black letters. I carried it inside without rushing. Fear has a way of making people react before they think. I had learned years ago that paperwork deserved patience more than emotion. The letter stated that I had violated community parking regulations by allowing a vehicle to obstruct access near my property. A fine would be considered unless I responded within 7 days. It sounded convincing, until I reached the second page. There, beneath several paragraphs quoting community regulations, sat the incident report. Complaint received. 3:07 p.m. Violation documented. 3:04 p.m. I read the times again. Then a third time. The complaint had supposedly been received 3 minutes after the violation was documented. Except that wasn't what caught my attention. The delivery notification still sat inside my email inbox. Delivered. 3:06 p.m. I opened the confirmation. The package scan had been completed at exactly 3:06. According to the HOA paperwork, someone had already finished documenting the violation 2 minutes earlier. That made no sense. Unless the report had been prepared before the delivery was even completed. I wasn't ready to accuse anyone of anything. But numbers have a habit of refusing to lie. I placed the printed notice beside my laptop and opened the security camera application connected to the cameras around my house. The footage loaded immediately. There was the delivery van turning onto my street. There was the driver parking beside the curb. There I was opening the front door. And there was Karen. She entered the frame almost before the driver had stepped away from his vehicle. She wasn't walking casually through the neighborhood. She was already holding her phone upright, recording before saying a single word. I paused the video, zoomed in. She wasn't looking around to understand the situation. She wasn't checking traffic. She wasn't asking whether the driver would be leaving shortly. She walked directly toward the van with purpose, as though she already expected to find a violation waiting for her. That detail lingered in my mind. Later that evening, I carried my trash bin toward the curb. Across the street, Mr. Harrison was trimming his hedges. He lowered his electric trimmer when he saw me. "Rough week?" he asked carefully. "You could say that." He hesitated before speaking again. "Karen's filed complaints before." I looked up. "About parking?" He gave a quiet laugh. "About almost everything." He glanced toward Karen's house before lowering his voice. "Garbage cans left out too long. Holiday decorations. Kids riding bicycles. Moving trucks. Contractors. Delivery drivers." The last two words caught my attention immediately. "Delivery drivers?" He nodded. "You aren't the first." Before I could ask another question, he offered an apologetic smile. "I stay out of HOA politics these days." Then he returned to trimming his hedges as though he regretted saying even that much. That night, sleep refused to come easily. Instead, I spread every document across my dining room table. The HOA notice, the delivery confirmation, screenshots from my security camera, a printed copy of the neighborhood parking rules. For nearly an hour, I compared dates, wording, and timestamps. One sentence inside the regulations finally caught my attention. Temporary commercial deliveries were permitted when they did not unreasonably block traffic. I looked back at the camera footage. The street had remained completely open. Cars could have passed in both directions without slowing down, which meant the central claim inside the complaint depended almost entirely on Karen's description rather than what had actually happened. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the growing stack of papers. Yesterday, I thought I was defending myself against a single complaint. Now I wasn't so sure. Because if Mr. Harrison was right, then somewhere inside Maple Ridge there might already be a trail of paperwork with Karen's name attached to far more complaints than anyone had bothered to question. The difference between coincidence and intention is simple. Coincidences happen once. Patterns leave footprints. The next morning, I decided to stop wondering and start verifying. Instead of driving straight to work, I called Swift Ship and asked if Michael, the driver from Tuesday, had a few minutes to talk. He agreed to meet during his lunch break at a small coffee shop just outside Maple Ridge. He arrived wearing the same blue company uniform, carrying a tablet tucked beneath one arm. "I've never had a customer ask to see my route logs before," he said with an awkward smile. "I've never had an HOA complaint over a 91-second delivery." He laughed softly. "Fair enough." After ordering coffee, he opened the tablet and signed into the company's route management system. Every stop was recorded automatically. Arrival, engine idle, package scan, departure. Nothing depended on memory. The GPS trail showed his van entering Maple Ridge at 3:04 p.m. He parked beside my property at 3:05. The package scan was completed at 3:06. He drove away at 3:07. The timestamps matched my security cameras almost perfectly. "What happens when someone files a complaint?" I asked. "Our safety department reviews everything. And they cleared me within 20 minutes. He rotated the tablet toward me. "They even noted there was no traffic obstruction." I stared at the screen. A supervisor had already concluded that no company policy had been violated. Yet somehow the HOA was still treating the same event as a serious offense. Before leaving, Michael hesitated. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. This isn't the first complaint we've received from your neighborhood." That caught my attention immediately. "Same street." He nodded. "Same person." He didn't say Karen's name. He didn't have to. "Our dispatch recognizes addresses after enough reports," he explained. "Whenever drivers see Maple Ridge now, they remind each other to keep every camera running." I thanked him for his honesty. Walking back to my truck, I realized something had quietly shifted. This was no longer my word against Karen's. Independent records were beginning to tell their own story. That afternoon, after finishing work, I visited the neighborhood clubhouse. The HOA office occupied a quiet corner near the community pool. Family photos of previous board members decorated the hallway, giving the building an atmosphere of stability and trust. The receptionist greeted me politely. "I'm here to request a copy of the parking regulations, referenced in my violation notice." She disappeared into a back office before returning with a binder nearly 3 inches thick. "You're welcome to review it here." I spent almost an hour turning pages. Most of the rules were ordinary. Landscaping, exterior paint colors, holiday decorations, trash collection. Parking occupied only a small section. When I reached the paragraph cited in my violation letter, something immediately stood out. The highlighted sentence had been quoted accurately. The sentence directly beneath it had not. It read, "Temporary commercial loading and delivery activity is permitted when reasonable access remains available." That sentence never appeared in the notice sent to me. It had simply been omitted. I copied the page number into my notebook. One missing sentence could completely change how the rule was interpreted. As I closed the binder, another homeowner quietly approached my table. She appeared to be in her late 60s with silver hair tied neatly behind her head. "I couldn't help noticing what you're reading," she said. "The parking rules." She gave a knowing smile. "My name is Linda Foster." We shook hands. I served on the HOA architectural committee years ago. Years ago, before Karen. Linda lowered her voice. "Be careful." I waited. Karen doesn't usually lose interest after one complaint. She looked toward the hallway before continuing. If she thinks someone challenged her authority, she always finds another reason. Those words stayed with me long after I left the clubhouse. Back home, I spread another set of documents across my dining room table. The HOA notice, the official parking rules, the GPS report, the camera timestamps. One by one, separate pieces from different sources were beginning to fit together. Not because I was looking for a fight, because the facts were quietly finding each other. And for the first time, I began to suspect that the strongest evidence in this entire dispute wasn't hidden inside Karen's accusations. It was hidden inside the records she never expected anyone to compare. Power reveals itself most clearly when someone believes no one will ever question it. 3 days after receiving the violation notice, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. Same HOA logo, same official language, different accusation. This time, the board claimed my trash bin had remained visible beyond the permitted collection hours. I stood at the mailbox reading the notice twice before letting out a quiet laugh. Not because it was funny, because my security camera automatically recorded the driveway 24 hours a day. I already knew exactly when I had rolled the bin back into the garage. Wednesday, 6:42 p.m. The notice claimed the violation had been observed at 8:15 p.m., 2 hours after the bin had disappeared. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same folder holding every other document. The pile was growing. So was my curiosity. That evening I sat on my back patio as the sun disappeared behind rows of identical rooftops. Maple Ridge looked peaceful enough to appear in a real estate brochure. Children chased fireflies across neighboring lawns. Wind rustled through maple trees lining the sidewalks. Only one house seemed unusually busy. Karen's. 2 different board members walked inside carrying folders. Their meeting lasted nearly an hour. When they finally left, Karen stood on her porch smiling confidently, waving as if she had just finished hosting friends instead of discussing neighborhood business. Something about it bothered me. HOA decisions were supposed to happen during official meetings, not private conversations on someone's front porch. The following afternoon, another unexpected visitor knocked on my door. It was Linda Foster. She carried an old accordion folder secured with a faded rubber band. "I wasn't sure whether to bring these," she admitted. "What are they?" "My old committee notes." We sat at the kitchen table while she carefully opened the folder. Most documents were ordinary architectural approvals from years earlier. Then she stopped at several handwritten pages. I started keeping notes after Karen joined the board. She slid one page toward me. Names, addresses, complaint dates. Some entries included small comments. Fence violation dismissed. Parking complaint unsupported. No evidence. "Did you make all of these?" I asked. Linda nodded. "I stopped after I resigned." "Why?" She looked toward my front window before answering. "Because questioning Karen became exhausting." Another page listed the same homeowner 3 different times over 6 months. Different accusations. Every complaint had eventually been withdrawn. What happened to these people? Most simply gave in. She sighed. Some paid fines they probably didn't know. Before leaving, Linda placed the folder in front of me. I think you'll know what to do with it. After she drove away, I spent hours comparing her notes with my own growing file. Patterns emerged almost immediately. Karen rarely stopped after one complaint. If the first accusation failed, another followed. Parking, trash bins, holiday lights, landscaping, noise. The subject changed. The target remained. Late that evening, my phone buzzed again. The community Facebook group. Karen had published another post. No names, no addresses, just another carefully worded reminder about respecting neighborhood standards. Beneath the post, dozens of neighbors agreed with her. Then one comment appeared that caught my attention. Didn't this happen to the Johnson family last year? Within minutes, the comment disappeared. Deleted. Not hidden beneath newer replies. Deleted entirely. I stared at the screen. Someone wasn't merely shaping conversations. Someone was managing them. I closed my laptop and walked into my home office. Against one wall stood a whiteboard I normally used for work projects. Tonight, I erased everything. Across the top, I wrote one sentence. Timeline. Beneath it, I began attaching copies of every notice, photograph, timestamp, GPS record, camera still, Facebook screenshot, and handwritten note. Separate incidents slowly connected into a single chain. Not proof of corruption. Not yet. But enough to demonstrate a consistent pattern that no longer looked accidental. As midnight approached, I stepped back and studied the board in silence. For the first time since that delivery van stopped outside my gate, I stopped thinking about defending myself. Because this was becoming much bigger than one homeowner. Karen hadn't simply filed complaints. She had built a system. The only question left was whether that system could survive once every piece of it was placed under the same light. The most dangerous moment for someone who abuses power is not when they are confronted. It is when they become so confident that they stop being careful. The email arrived just before noon on Friday. Special HOA board meeting. Attendance requested. The agenda contained only one item. Compliance review. No homeowner names were listed, but I knew exactly who the meeting was about. Karen wanted a public victory. She wanted the board to make an example out of me. Instead of feeling anxious, I opened the storage cabinet in my office and removed 3 empty binders. The first held every HOA notice. The second contained photographs, security camera timestamps, and delivery records. The third was reserved for something even more important. The rules. Not Karen's interpretation of them. The actual governing documents. By evening, every page had been highlighted, cross-referenced, and indexed with colored tabs. Blue for parking, yellow for enforcement procedures, green for homeowner rights, red for sections that directly contradicted the accusations against me. The binders looked less like neighborhood paperwork and more like evidence prepared for court. Saturday morning brought another surprise. Michael called. "I thought you should know," he said. "Our dispatch manager approved releasing a certified copy of my route log if you need it." "I appreciate that." He also included the dash camera recording. I paused. The dash camera? We record every delivery. Until that moment, I had completely forgotten modern delivery vehicles carried forward-facing cameras. What does it show? The entire stop. His answer was simple. So, everything. After hanging up, I couldn't help smiling. Not because I expected dramatic footage. Because cameras don't care about opinions. They only remember what happened. That afternoon, I received another unexpected knock. Mr. Harrison stood on my porch holding a small flash drive. "I've been debating whether to bring this over." "What is it?" "My security footage." He shifted awkwardly. "My driveway. Camera points toward your side of the street." I stared at him. "It caught Tuesday." "You saw everything?" I saw Karen walk over before the driver even shut his door. He handed me the drive. "I don't like getting involved." "I know. But I also don't like watching good neighbors become easy targets." After he left, I loaded the video onto my computer. The angle differed from mine. Wider. Clearer. Karen entered the frame almost immediately after the delivery van appeared. She wasn't casually walking down the sidewalk. She exited her own front yard while already unlocking her phone. By the time the driver stepped out, her camera was recording. She had been ready before there was anything to record. I replayed the footage 3 times. Every viewing reinforced the same impression. This wasn't a spontaneous complaint. It looked prepared. Sunday evening, Maple Ridge held its monthly neighborhood barbecue at the clubhouse. Families gathered beneath strings of warm lights while children played basketball in the parking lot. Karen moved confidently through the crowd, greeting neighbors with practiced warmth. She laughed easily, complimented gardens, asked about grandchildren. From a distance, she looked exactly like the kind of volunteer every community hoped to have. Then our eyes met. She walked toward me carrying a paper plate. "I hope you've had time to think about the meeting." "I have. You can still avoid unnecessary embarrassment." I smiled politely. I wasn't planning on being embarrassed. For the first time since this began, something flickered across her face. Not anger, confusion. She had expected frustration, perhaps even fear. Calmness hadn't been part of her script. She recovered quickly. "The board appreciates homeowners who accept responsibility. I imagine they appreciate facts even more." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The conversations around us continued as if nothing unusual were happening. Finally, Karen gave a restrained smile. "We'll see." Then she walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd before turning my attention back to the families enjoying their evening. No one else knew what would happen on Tuesday night. To them, it was simply another HOA meeting. To me, it had become something entirely different. For nearly a week, Karen had built her case with notices, photographs, accusations, and confidence. She believed she was walking into that meeting with all the evidence. She had no idea that by trying so hard to control the story, she had unknowingly created the very timeline that would begin unraveling it. And for the first time since a delivery van stopped outside my gate for 91 seconds, I wasn't preparing to defend myself. I was preparing to let the facts speak first. Tuesday evening arrived with the quiet confidence of a storm that no one else could see. By 6:30, the parking lot outside the Maple Ridge Clubhouse was already full. Neighbors walked toward the meeting carrying folding chairs, notebooks, and coffee cups. Most expected another routine HOA discussion about landscaping budgets or seasonal decorations. Only a handful knew there would be a compliance hearing. Only 2 people knew how much evidence had been gathered before anyone entered the room. I carried 3 binders into the clubhouse. Nothing more. No dramatic entrance. No attorney. No speeches prepared in advance. Just documents. Karen was already there. She stood near the front of the room beside 2 board members, laughing comfortably as residents found their seats. Every few moments, she glanced toward the entrance. When she saw me, her smile widened. Then her eyes drifted to the binders in my hands. The smile faded slightly. The meeting began exactly at 7. Routine business came first. Financial updates. Pool maintenance. Upcoming landscaping contracts. Nearly 40 minutes passed before the board president cleared his throat. Our final agenda item concerns homeowner compliance. The room became noticeably quieter. He looked toward me. "Mr. Walker, we've received multiple reports regarding violations associated with your property." Karen folded her hands neatly across the table. Her posture suggested complete certainty. The board secretary began reading each allegation. Unauthorized parking. Improper trash storage. Failure to comply with community standards. Each accusation sounded serious when read aloud. Each was accompanied by copies of Karen's photographs. When the secretary finished, the president looked toward me. "You now have an opportunity to respond." I stood slowly. The room remained silent. "I appreciate the opportunity." My voice surprised even me. Steady. Calm. I opened the first binder. The parking complaint concerns a delivery vehicle. I placed a printed GPS route log onto the projector table. The vehicle remained for 91 seconds. Then another document. The delivery company cleared the driver after reviewing their records. Then another. My home security camera confirms the timeline. No emotion, just facts. One board member leaned forward. Another adjusted his glasses. Karen remained perfectly still. I continued. The violation notice states the incident was documented before the delivery itself had even been completed. Several heads turned toward the paperwork. The board president frowned. "Could you explain?" I simply handed him both timestamps. He compared them without speaking. The silence lasted longer than any argument could have. I opened the second binder. The trash bin allegation. A security camera image appeared on the projector. Timestamp. 6:42 p.m. Another document followed. The HOA complaint claimed the bin remained outside until 8:15. The bin had already been inside the garage for nearly 2 hours. Someone near the back quietly whispered, "Seriously?" Karen shifted in her chair for the first time. The board secretary flipped through her own copies with increasing urgency. I wasn't finished. The governing documents quoted in my violation notice were incomplete. I opened the third binder. One page contained the paragraph cited against me. The next page showed the sentence immediately beneath it. The sentence omitted from every notice. Temporary commercial loading and delivery activity is permitted when reasonable access remains available. I said nothing else. I didn't need to. The room read the sentence for itself. The board president looked toward Karen. Was this provision considered? She answered carefully. I believe the driver's conduct still violated community expectations. Expectations, the president repeated quietly. Not necessarily the written rule. For the first time that evening, uncertainty spread across the front table. Board members began comparing copies, highlighting pages, checking dates. No one looked at me anymore. Everyone was looking at the paperwork. I reached into my bag one final time. I also have independent video footage from another homeowner. Karen's head lifted immediately. It shows the entire encounter from across the street. I placed the flash drive beside the projector. I haven't played it. The room fell completely silent. I thought it would be more appropriate for the board to review it themselves. No one spoke. Not because anyone had reached a conclusion. Because the meeting had quietly transformed. It was no longer about whether a delivery driver had parked beside my gate for 91 seconds. It had become a question no one in that room expected to ask. How many of the complaints that reached the board had ever been examined this carefully before? Silence has a weight of its own. It settled over the meeting room long after I placed the flash drive on the table. No one reached for it immediately. No one rushed to defend anyone. The board president finally looked toward the association's property manager. Can we view this now? The room lights dimmed. The projector hummed softly. A moment later, Mr. Harrison's security footage filled the screen. The camera overlooked the entire street from across the road. There was my house, the delivery van, the empty roadway. The timestamp in the upper corner matched every document already sitting inside the binders. No narration was necessary. Everyone watched as the van stopped. The driver's door opened. Then Karen appeared. Not from the sidewalk. Not by coincidence. She walked directly out of her own driveway while unlocking her phone. By the time Michael stepped away from the van, she was already recording. No hesitation. No confusion. No attempt to determine whether the stop would be brief. She had decided before speaking a single word. The footage continued. The driver remained calm. I accepted the package. Traffic flowed normally around the vehicle without slowing. Less than 2 minutes later, the van pulled away. The recording ended. The lights came back on. No one spoke. Karen broke the silence first. That doesn't prove I acted improperly. Her voice remained composed, but it lacked the certainty everyone had heard earlier. I simply reported what I believed was a violation. The board president folded his hands. No one is questioning your right to report concerns. He paused. We are questioning whether our enforcement process has been sufficiently objective. The distinction changed the atmosphere instantly. This was no longer homeowner versus homeowner. It had become board versus procedure. One of the directors turned toward the property manager. How many complaints has Mrs. Brooks submitted during the past 2 years? Karen looked over immediately. I don't see how that's relevant. It may be very relevant. The property manager opened his laptop. The keyboard clicks echoed through the room. Several long moments passed. Then he stopped typing. I have the records. He adjusted his glasses. 118 formal complaints. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. Someone in the back whispered, 118? Another board member leaned forward. How many resulted in confirmed violations? The manager continued reading. 31. And the remaining 87? Dismissed. The room became even quieter than before. Karen straightened in her chair. I report what I observe. No one disputes that, another director replied. But an unusually high dismissal rate suggests we should review our process. The board president looked toward me. Mr. Walker, do you have anything further? I glanced at the 3 binders. Then back at the board. No. The answer surprised several people. I've presented everything I intended to present. You aren't requesting disciplinary action? I shook my head. I'm requesting accuracy. Nothing more. Nothing less. For several seconds, the only sound came from the air conditioner humming above the ceiling tiles. Finally, Linda Foster slowly stood from the audience. She hadn't spoken all evening. I served on one of this community's committees for 9 years. Every head turned toward her. I resigned because too many complaints stopped being about neighborhood standards. She looked directly at the board. They became about personalities. No one interrupted. I think tonight proves those are not the same thing. She sat back down. No applause followed. It wasn't that kind of moment. The board president quietly thanked her before calling for a brief executive recess. Board members carried the binders, the flash drive, and the governing documents into a private conference room. The main hall emptied into whispers. Neighbors gathered in small circles. Some avoided looking at Karen. Others looked at her for the first time with uncertainty instead of admiration. She remained seated alone at the front table. Her phone rested beside her untouched. For the first time since this began, she wasn't controlling the conversation. She was waiting for someone else's decision. 25 minutes later, the conference room door opened. The board members returned without speaking. Each carried the same expression. Measured. Deliberate. The president unfolded a single sheet of paper and looked across the room. We have reached several unanimous decisions. No one moved. The room seemed to stop breathing. And I realized that after a week of accusations, documents, and quiet persistence, the next few sentences would change far more than the outcome of my own complaint. The board president did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every person in the room was already listening. He unfolded the paper in front of him and looked around the clubhouse before speaking. After reviewing the documentation submitted this evening, the board has reached 3 unanimous decisions. No chairs moved. No phones buzzed. The silence was complete. First, he glanced toward me. All pending compliance notices issued to Mr. Ethan Walker are hereby dismissed. He paused just long enough for the words to settle. The evidence presented does not support enforcement under the governing documents. I simply nodded. Nothing more. There was no victory in proving something that should never have required proving. The president continued. Second, he turned toward the rest of the board. Effective immediately, all future homeowner complaints involving fines or violations will require independent verification before formal notices are issued. Several homeowners exchanged surprised looks. One elderly man quietly whispered, "About time." The president continued reading. Photographs submitted by a single complainant will no longer constitute sufficient evidence without supporting documentation. Another quiet murmur spread through the room. The policy wasn't aimed at one person. It would protect everyone. Then came the final decision. Third, his eyes rested briefly on Karen. The board will conduct an internal review of complaint procedures and temporarily suspend individual enforcement authority pending completion of that review. He folded the paper. No dramatic language. No accusations. No public humiliation. Just procedure. Karen remained perfectly still. For several seconds, she didn't react at all. Then she slowly stood. I've volunteered hundreds of hours for this neighborhood. No one argued. I'm only trying to maintain community standards. Still no one interrupted. The board president answered calmly. No one doubts the time you've contributed. He chose each word carefully. But good intentions do not replace fair process. That sentence seemed to drain the remaining certainty from the room. Karen looked around, perhaps expecting immediate support. Instead, she found something she hadn't expected. Thoughtful silence. Neighbors who once nodded automatically now looked down at their papers. Others stared quietly at the projector screen that had displayed the timestamps only minutes earlier. No one celebrated. No one mocked her. There was simply nothing left to argue against. As residents slowly gathered their belongings, several people approached me. Not to congratulate me, to thank me. One couple admitted they had quietly paid a fine years earlier because challenging it had seemed impossible. Another homeowner said he had nearly stopped ordering large deliveries altogether. Linda smiled gently as she passed. I hoped someone would finally ask the right questions. Mr. Harrison shook my hand. I'm glad I brought that flash drive. So am I. Outside, the evening air felt noticeably cooler. Families drifted toward the parking lot beneath rows of streetlights. The clubhouse behind us slowly emptied until only board members remained inside organizing stacks of paperwork that would now need to be reviewed one file at a time. I walked toward my truck carrying the same 3 binders I had brought into the meeting. They weren't heavier, but somehow they no longer felt like evidence. They felt finished. As I unlocked the driver's door, I noticed movement across the lot. Karen stood alone beside her SUV. For a brief moment, our eyes met. She didn't wave. Neither did I. There was no satisfaction in seeing someone lose influence. Only relief that facts had finally spoken louder than assumptions. I climbed into the truck and drove home through the same streets where everything had started. The maple trees were still there. The sidewalks looked exactly the same. My driveway looked exactly the same. Nothing about the neighborhood had changed. Except the people living in it now understood something they hadn't understood a week earlier. Rules matter, but the way they are enforced matters even more. The following Tuesday, another blue Swift ship been stopped outside my gate. Michael stepped out carrying a package. He smiled as he walked toward the porch. No complaints today? I smiled back. Just a delivery. 91 seconds later, he drove away. No cameras appeared. No voices followed him down the street. Only the ordinary sound of a truck disappearing around the corner. Sometimes the biggest victories aren't announced. They arrive quietly. They restore something that should never have been taken. And in the end, it wasn't a delivery driver who changed Maple Ridge. It was the simple decision to compare one accusation against the truth. Because the strongest answer to abuse was never anger. It was evidence. And sometimes, 91 honest seconds are enough to change an entire neighborhood.